Triangulation has been a fairly important part of my writing life for pretty much as long as I've had a writing life. Um, in 2007, pretty soon after I graduated from college, I wrote two short stories and I sent one to the Parsec contest. The theme that year was Few Minutes at the End of Time. That's an interesting theme to write for. And the theme for the anthology that year was just End of Time. Because, back in the day, they were connected somehow, the two themes. And I got second place in the contest with my story, which was my first positive writing response from anyone ever. I was so happy. I literally I was at work and I checked my email and I had to go outside so that I could like hop up and down because I was just so overwhelmed with joy because like I said, first anything positive from anybody ever. And so, Parsec did that for me. So it's kind of a big deal. It holds a very special place in my heart. But of the two stories, the one that actually had the bigger impact on my life was the one I sent to the anthology that Pete Butler rejected, um, did not make it. But he also sent me this note in my nice rejection that he sent me, letting me know that he was in a writing group in Pittsburgh and he saw that I was also in Pittsburgh and inviting me to come and join the writing group. And, I was pretty shy. I'm still pretty shy, but like I was way worse 14 years ago. Um, so I dragged my husband with me and we started going to what was the current iteration of Word, Write or Die at the time, in the Monroeville Library. So I joined that current iteration of Word and made my first friends in Pittsburgh. I was young, right out of college. And so, sort of a hugely formative kind of thing, my first actual adult friends. And I'm friends with most of them still. Most of them aren't writing anymore, but that happens. And then by the next year, I was helping to edit Triangulation. We would it was still Pete Butler was still in charge of it, so he had us all come over to his house. He printed the stories out, and we would all sit around and read them and pass them around, which is 100% not the way things are done anymore. But it was a good time, and we had a lot of fun with it. And then I was an assistant editor for a few years, and then I became co-editor with Steve Ramey for a year. And then a few years later, Diane came to me and was like, Jamie, would you like to be in charge of Triangulation? And I was like, well, yes, I would. I will happily do that because, like I said, it's a very special place in my heart. It's very dear to me. So I was really happy to be able to produce the 2 years that I did. And then I was very happy to be able to hand it over to Frank and Pete, who are both incredibly smart and talented and did a great job with the 2 years that they did. And then after I stopped working on it, I started sending them stories, and I have had stories in most of them since then. Not all of them. I didn't get into Appetites, which is the first one that Frank and Pete did. Um, so I figured I would read some of my own stories from the later versions because I just always feel more comfortable reading my own work than other people's. So I have prepared a few stories, and if we have time, I will get through all of them. And if not, I'll read a couple. So, oh, and I brought my stack. Look at this. Sorry, Karen, the screen's going to move. This is my stack of triangulations that I had something to do with. This is like, I think 12 books I counted. This is a dozen years of my life right here. So I'm going to start with my story from Triangulation, Harmony, and Dissonance. So this is the second one that Frank Arito and Douglas Gwillem, Pete, his friends call him Pete, put out. And I am going to read my story, which has a tiny illustration. So I'll hold it up so you guys can check it out. And this is A Song Like Laughter. But before I start, I'm going to move this stack of books so it's not in between me and my water, because that would be bad. So, A Song Like Laughter by Jamie Lackey. It is me. The master pulled my arm out of its socket. It came free with a faint pop, and I held my elbow stiff while he rotated my arm like a crank, winding the delicate workings inside my torso. With each turn, my muscles tightened until my whole body was stiff and immobile. Just as the strain edged into pain, he stopped. He reached for the keys embedded in my belly and began to play. The sound resonated in my chest and erupted from my lips like a song. He played until the notes just began to lose their power, then left me, still immobile. It took almost 2 hours before I was able to head down to the kitchen. I sagged onto a padded stool at the long table. One of the serving capuchins set a cup of tea in front of me. The monkey stared at me with its surgically mismatched green and black eyes till I took a sip, then scampered away to see to its other tasks. The capuchins always added too much honey, but they made tea the way the master liked it. I drank it slowly, and by the time I finished, my body had returned to its normal state. I went out to the stable to visit Zebra. The master had shaped her into an instrument, like me. Her black stripes stood raised from the white, and each produced a different note when struck with a padded mallet. Her spiked mane was electrified and produced eerie tones when the master waved his hands around her. Her hooves chimed if she stepped toward me. I rubbed nutrient gel into her gums, then stroked the underside of her chin, where her flesh was still warm and pliable. She leaned into my touch, and we gave each other what comfort we could. I was forbidden to play any of the other instruments. That pleasure was reserved for the master alone. The long-tailed harpbirds, the flute snakes, the hornfish, they all lived in pens alongside Zebra and Lion, who the master had tried to shape into a bagpipe. Where I was the master's greatest triumph, Lion was his greatest failure. The master had woven Lion's mane into an air bladder and had hollowed out most of his insides to be echoing chambers. But the sound was strident and harsh, and could only be played for a few bars before the tone failed. I rubbed salve along the still visible seams on Lion's flank before forcing some nutrient gel under his tongue. He gave me a single disinterested look before closing his eyes again. I kissed his furry cheek, then went back into the house. The capuchins shook me awake, then pulled me toward the master's room. It was forbidden for me to enter, so I resisted as best I could. Eventually, they carried me across the threshold, and then I saw him, sprawled across his canopied bed. I'd never seen him sleep. He seemed smaller, his face slack instead of twisted in concentration, his eyes closed instead of glowing with fierce interest or anger. One of the capuchins shook him. His head lolled, but he didn't stir. I touched his hand, and it was cool, like tea left too long on the table. I hugged his limped hand to my chest and wept. Around me, the capuchins watched, silent. A week passed, and we all slipped into a state of lassitude. My body felt loose and odd as days slipped by without anyone to wind and play me. The smaller animals were more accustomed to days or even weeks without the master's attention, but Zebra and Lion were both clearly as lost and unmoored as I was. Zebra snapped at me when I touched her, and Lion hadn't opened his eyes for days. I had watched the master play them 1,000 times. A thrill of fear passed over me as I lifted Zebra's mallet. I waited for a sharp word of anger, a smack across the wrist. But it didn't come. I tapped out a basic tune, nothing like the intricate melodies that the master commanded. But all of the other animals gathered around as I played, their eyes filled with desperate longing. The harp strings cut my fingers, and the wretched sounds that I coaxed out of Lion hurt my ears. But playing the others was a strange joy, and the music brought happiness back to the island. The capuchins finally put less honey in my tea. I missed the feeling of song swelling in my own body, and my muscles continued to feel wrong and slack. The master had tuned me once a week. Was I slipping out of true? A month passed. Small pains grew in my joints, and my body ached in the mornings. It was all I could do to get up, drink some tea, and play the others. Then a boat of strangers arrived at the dock. The capuchins spotted them long before they arrived. Normally, we would all hide when strangers arrived, but this time there was no master to trade with them. This task fell to me as well. I had no idea how to accomplish it. Figures moved on the deck, seeing to their tasks as doggedly as the Capuchins. One of them, a man with long hair covered by a triangle of purple cloth, jumped out onto the dock. Hey, we've got your regular shipment, just need someone to sign for it. Where's the old man? He asked. I shook my head. He stared at me. Who are you, his daughter? I shook my head again. Can you even understand me? This time, I nodded. But you can't speak. Another nod. Did something happen to the old man? A third nod. I'm sorry to hear it. Is there anything we can do to help you out? Even as he offered, he turned his back to the boat and shouted, There's a girl here. Apparently the old man is sick or something. But I knew just how this stranger could actually help. There's a girl here. But I knew just sorry. But I knew just how this stranger could actually help. When he turned back to me, I mimed winding my arm and playing my keys. He stared blankly at me. Sorry, sweetie. I've got no idea what you're saying. Do you know sign language or anything? I gestured for him to follow me and ran to the house. The master's study stank, and we'd all avoided it since his death, but I grabbed a sheet of paper and drew out the steps. The stranger stopped in the doorway, horrified. He's dead. You didn't even bury him? I handed him the paper. This doesn't make any sense. I stomped my foot in frustration. It seemed very simple to me. I held my arm out with my elbow stiffly at 90 degrees. I'm not standing here with a rotting corpse and tugging on your arm. Jesus, what's wrong with you? I blinked back sudden tears and turned my face quickly away, waiting for a slap. Tears were forbidden. I look, we'll handle burying the body. Let's get you to the doctor so she can take a look at you. The master had railed against doctors and their unenlightened ways. I stiffened with fear, but the man pulled me from the room and back toward the boat. I struggled, and there, in the hall, he pulled my arm out of its socket. At the faint pop, he jumped back. I pointed to the paper again, desperate. The man looked like he was about to be sick, but slowly, so slowly that I was afraid he might not understand, he reached for my arm. Joy overrode all of the fear and worry as my body stiffened. I was only half wound when he looked at the paper again. Am I really supposed to touch your stomach now? I managed a tiny nod. His fingers bumped a key, and the song flew out of me like laughter. The look on his face now was something that I could not read. He lifted my shirt and looked at the keys incised in my flesh. He looked back up at my face and said, Dear God. I had no idea what that meant, but I didn't care because he pressed my keys again. He was not a skilled player. Even at my start, I was better. But it didn't matter that the song lacked any sort of melody. I was singing again. I allowed their doctor to examine me. It was strange. She touched me with gloved fingers, and there were no scalpels or saws involved at all. Her vocal cords have been removed. He removed some of her internal organs too, but I can't say for sure which ones without an MRI. I'm fairly certain he removed her reproductive and digestive orders, since externally she's like a doll. That's not possible. None of this should be possible. Have you seen the crazy menagerie out back in the stables? The birds? The fish? The fucking lion and zebra? None of them should be alive. The man rubbed his forehead. I can't believe we had no idea what he was doing here. This can't be legal. He turned back to me. Do you eat or drink? I nodded, and he handed me a strange brown block. It smelled sweet, and the outer coating melted under the heat of my fingers. I examined it closely, then held it back out to him. Go ahead and eat it. The thought was sickening. What did one even do with such a thing? My thoughts clearly showed on my face, and the doctor took the thing away. What do you eat? I led them to the kitchen, where a Capuchin gave each of us tea. Then I showed them the nutritive gel. I rubbed some on my gums to demonstrate. It was time to feed and play the others, so I moved to do so. The man grabbed my arm. What are you doing? Jack, let her go, the doctor said. He released me reluctantly. Can we come with you? The doctor asked. I shrugged. I'd never played for anyone but the animals before, and the thought of an audience made me nervous. But I couldn't stop them from following. When I finished, they were both staring. I held out my arm, hopeful that the doctor might play better than the man. He made you all into instruments, the doctor said. I shook my arm at her, impatient. Surely not everyone in the world was as slow as these two. She wants you to play her, the man said. This is just horrifying, the doctor said, but she finally reached out and pulled on my arm. She fumbled on the keys at first, but she could play. New songs unlike any that the master had played. I watched her face, watched as her horror faded and her fascination grew. She played till the notes faltered. That, I've never heard anything like that before, she said. You have a truly beautiful voice. I would be happy to play again. I hugged her. The doctor came back the next morning as I was drinking my first cup of tea and watching the sunrise over the ocean. This really is a beautiful place, isn't it? She asked. I smiled at her, and she sat next to me. I wasn't always a ship's doctor, she said. I had a normal life, a private practice, a family. I pointed at the stable. They're your family? She asked. I nodded, pleased that she understood so easily. You do take good care of them. Better care than I took of my family. A Capuchin gave her a cup of tea. She held the cup in both hands. I waited. I was very focused on my career, on helping people, but I didn't notice that the people who mattered most were drifting away, till they were gone, and then everything reminded me of them, of what I'd lost through my own blindness, so I couldn't stay. So I ran away to sea. She sipped her tea. This place is nothing like my old home, but I think I could belong here, and I haven't felt that way in a long time. The boat was still docked days later. There were many people on board, but only the first man and the doctor ever came ashore. I was making up new nutritive gel, surrounded by helpful Capuchins who handed me ingredients as I needed them. The doctor had come to play every day, and I felt better than I had since the master died. I danced to the sound of the wind in the leaves. The doctor's new songs had inspired me to try different melodies when I played, too. I'd never dreamed that I would create something so entirely new before. The man strode into the kitchen, glaring. I flinched. I knew what that look meant. He froze as I stood, waiting for the blow to fall. What's wrong with you? He asked. Why are you looking at me like that? My eyes flicked to his hands, balled into fists at his side. You think I'm going to hit you, he said. I nodded. Did he hit you on top of everything else? I nodded again. It didn't even occur to you to run? Why just stand there and let it happen? I tried to imagine a life where there was somewhere to run to. I waved toward the shore, then around, trying to indicate that there was no place to escape. I'd learned that so long ago that I couldn't remember ever not knowing it. You don't have to stay here, he said. We don't have space for the animals, but we can get you off this wretched island. My horror must have shown in my face. Janine is thinking of staying here on this insane island of monsters. I could only assume that Janine was the doctor's name. Hope kindled in my chest, and his scowl deepened. You want that. You want her to stay here and be your new keeper? Why not come with us? Escape this place. I pointed out to the stable, where the others were waiting for their lunches. They're just animals. I tapped my own chest, then pointed back to the stables. You're not the same as they are. You're a human. I shook my head. He'd never understand. There is a whole world outside of this place. This island doesn't have to be your prison. You could build a life for yourself instead of living to serve a breed of mutilated animals. You can be more than this. I ignored him, and eventually he left. The doctor came and listened to my new songs. I was happiest with the one that I wrote for Zebra, but I was also proud of the tune that I coaxed out of Lion. It wove the pauses required to pump his mane into the music. Can you read music? She asked. I shook my head. Can you read at all? I shook my head again. Would you like to learn? I imagined being able to learn new songs from sheets of paper. How many songs could exist? Hundreds? Thousands? I grinned at the doctor and nodded. The man found us in the kitchen, sitting together over a pile of papers covered with shaky letters. My hand ached from the unfamiliar motions. We can't wait here any longer, he said. Get her to pack some things and get to the boat. She's not going to leave the others, Jack. They're just animals. They'll die without her, and she loves them. Would you be able to leave them behind if you were in her place? He sighed. Do you think you'd be able to leave me if I was insane enough to want to stay here? The doctor sighed. I have made my decision, Jack, and it's mine to make. I woke that night to the smell of smoke. Orange light flickered outside my window, and I ran to the stables. A flaming harpbird, too heavy to truly fly, soared out through a broken window, then fell at my feet. I wished I could scream. I pointed the Capuchins toward the kitchen, hoping they'd bring the healing salve. I ran into the fire. Lion was already engulfed, his body wheezing and popping as it collapsed under the flames. Zebra reared again and again, her hooves chiming a staccato beat. I wrapped my arms around her neck, and her mane wailed. Heat dried and tightened my skin, and the flames licked at us as I pulled her outside. Fire spread up my arm as we emerged from the inferno into the cool night air. Pain screamed through me. A heavy blanket engulfed me, and the doctor shook me as she patted out glowing patches on my nightdress. Are you all right? She asked. I shook my head and leaned against Zebra. Tears blurred my vision. A Capuchin scrambled onto my shoulder, gripping a jar of salve. I took it and rubbed it into Zebra's reddened stripes. What happened? The doctor asked. I glanced back at the boat. You don't think Jack did this? I raised an eyebrow at her. Clearly, I wasn't the only one with suspicions. She frowned. You're right. Of course he did. I blinked away more tears and focused on Zebra. She would be okay. She had to be. I saw Lion every time I closed my eyes. The doctor left, then eventually returned clutching a black bag. I told them to leave and not come back. Now, stop for a second and let me look at you. We managed to save most of the hornfish, a handful of the flute snakes, the single harpbird that had crashed at my feet, and Zebra. The fire spread to the house and engulfed the master's wing before spluttering out and smoking. The kitchen had survived, but not much else was left. I sat on the ground and watched the smoke blow toward the sea. More boats will come, the doctor said. We could leave this place if you wanted. All of us. I imagined a world filled with strangers, of unknown and unknowable threats, and shook my head. Would you like me to stay? I nodded and managed a tiny smile for her. I promise I won't become like he was. I didn't know if she was talking about my master or the man from the boat, but either way, I believed her.